The Millionaire CEO was down on his knees proposing to his fiancée when two little girls walked up and said, "You're our dad." The rose garden had never been quieter. Children who had been chasing each other between flower beds slowed to a stop. Couples strolling along the winding paths paused when they noticed a young man in a tailored navy suit lowering himself onto one knee. Even the violinist nearby softened his melody, as though he understood that this was a moment worth protecting. Stefan Powell barely noticed any of them. His attention rested on one person, Shania Henry. She stood a few feet away with both hands covering her mouth, her eyes already shining. She had laughed all afternoon, teasing him about acting unusually mysterious, but now every playful remark had disappeared. She knew exactly what was happening. Stefan reached into his jacket and brought out a small velvet box. For the first time in years, the confident CEO who negotiated million-dollar deals without blinking felt his hands tremble. He opened the box. Inside rested a ring he had spent months choosing. His voice came out softer than he expected. "Shania." She whispered his name. "Stefan." A smile crossed his face. "Before you walked into my life, I thought success meant building something people could admire." He shook his head gently. "Then you taught me that the greatest thing a person can build is a home inside someone else's heart." Tears slipped down Shania's cheeks before he had even finished speaking. Stefan let out a quiet laugh, trying to steady his emotions. "You've celebrated every victory with me," he said. "You've reminded me to slow down when work tried to steal every hour of my day. You've made ordinary mornings feel like something worth looking forward to." Shania smiled through her tears. "You make it sound like I performed miracles." "You did." A few people nearby smiled at the exchange. One elderly woman reached for her husband's hand. A little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Is he asking her to marry him?" His mother nodded with a warm smile. "I think he is." Stefan looked back at Shania. "No matter where life takes us." He lifted the ring. "I only know one thing for certain." He drew a careful breath. "I want every tomorrow to begin with you." Shania laughed through happy tears. "You really planned all of this?" "Not perfectly," Stefan admitted with a grin. "I practiced this speech at least 20 times, and somehow I've forgotten half of it." She shook her head. "You don't need a speech." His smile widened. "That's good, because it's disappearing by the second." The people watching chuckled softly. Shania stepped closer. She looked at the ring, then back into his eyes, her lips parted. "Stefan." She took one slow breath. "Yes." A tiny voice rose from behind the gathering. "Daddy?" The single word floated across the garden with surprising clarity. Every conversation stopped. The violinist lowered his instrument without realizing it. Shania blinked. Stefan frowned, slowly turning his head. Standing several yards away were two little girls. They couldn't have been older than 6. They held each other's hands tightly, as though gathering courage simply by standing together. Neither child smiled. Neither looked frightened enough to run away. They simply looked hopeful. The older girl swallowed nervously before taking a careful step forward. The younger one stayed beside her without letting go. People quietly moved aside, creating a path neither child had asked for. Stefan remained frozen. He searched their faces. They looked familiar, not enough for recognition, just enough to stir a memory he couldn't quite reach. The older girl looked directly into his eyes. "We finally found you." Stefan slowly stood. His heartbeat no longer matched the peaceful violin melody that had filled the garden only moments earlier. "Sweetheart," he said carefully, Do I know you?" The older girl nodded. Without saying another word, she slipped off her tiny backpack and carefully unzipped the front pocket. She reached inside and removed a photograph protected inside a clear plastic sleeve. The edges were worn from being handled many times. She walked the final few steps towards Stefan and held it out with both hands. He accepted it automatically. The instant he looked down, the color drained from his face. The picture showed a much younger version of himself, standing beside a woman whose smile he had never truly forgotten. Both of them were laughing outside the children's hospital where they had volunteered years ago. His fingers tightened around the photograph. A single name escaped his lips. Ellie. The older girl looked relieved the moment she heard that name. "Mommy said you'd remember." The younger girl gave a small nod. She kept that picture safe. Stefan stared from the photograph to the girls. Back again. Nothing made sense. Shania looked over his shoulder at the faded image. She had never seen that woman before. She had never heard that name. Her eyes searched Stefan's face for an explanation. Instead, she found complete disbelief, the kind that couldn't be rehearsed, couldn't be faked, couldn't be hidden. The younger girl squeezed her sister's hand. The older one gathered every bit of courage she had. "Mommy told us," she said quietly, "if we ever found you." Her voice shook. "We should tell you the truth." Stefan could barely speak. "What truth?" The little girl looked up at him with complete certainty. "You're our daddy." The ring slipped from Stefan's hand and disappeared into the grass. No one moved. No one spoke. The proposal had vanished beneath a question that no one there could answer. Before we discover how two little girls walked into a proposal carrying a photograph from a forgotten chapter of Stefan's life, welcome to Mr. Williams' Storytime. If you're joining us for the first time, you're in the right place for heartfelt stories filled with unforgettable characters, unexpected turns, and meaningful life lessons that grow naturally from the journey. And if you've been part of this community already, welcome back. Your support helps this channel continue bringing stories that stay with you long after they end. If you enjoy emotional storytelling with genuine surprises, take a moment to subscribe, turn on notifications, and become part of our growing family. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Because the question isn't just whether Stefan is truly those girls' father. The real question is how a man who believed he had left one chapter of his life behind could suddenly find himself standing between the woman he was about to marry and two children who claimed they had been searching for him all along. Let's go back to the beginning. By the time most people reached the office, Stefan Powell had already finished his first meeting of the day. At 27, he led one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country. Newspapers called him a business prodigy. Financial programs debated his next move. Universities invited him to speak to students who hoped to build companies of their own. Stefan accepted very few of those invitations. He preferred spending his time where it mattered most. Inside the company he had built from nothing more than determination, sleepless nights, and an old laptop that had crashed more times than he cared to remember. His headquarters reflected the same philosophy. The lobby was modern without feeling cold. Employees greeted one another by name. Fresh coffee was always available, and the walls displayed artwork created by local students instead of expensive decorations chosen to impress visitors. The company had grown quickly. Its values had not. That morning, Stefan walked through the building without announcing himself. He stopped at workstations, asked about families, congratulated a software engineer whose daughter had just won a spelling competition, and wished another employee luck before an important medical appointment. None of it was for appearances. In fact, there were no cameras nearby. To Stefan, success had never been measured by how many people recognized his face. It was measured by how many people felt valued after meeting him. As Stefan stepped into his office, his assistant Maya followed with a tablet in hand. "Good morning," she said. "Your schedule is full, but there are 2 items I thought you'd want to review personally." She handed him the tablet. "The first is a request from Human Resources." Stefan scanned the file. An employee's husband needed emergency surgery. Insurance covered only part of the cost. Without hesitation, he signed the approval. "Create an anonymous assistance grant," he said. Maya smiled. "I thought you might say that. And don't tell them where it came from." She nodded. "They'll probably figure it out." "Maybe." He closed the file. "But they shouldn't have to thank anyone while they're worried about family." Maya opened the second request. "A local high school is asking whether the scholarship program will continue next year." Stefan didn't even look at the numbers. Expanded. By how much? Enough that qualified students aren't turned away because of money. She made a note. "I'll contact them today." Before leaving, she paused. "You know." "What?" "You make my job very predictable." Stefan laughed. "That's a complaint?" "No." She smiled. "It's actually my favorite part of working here." People often ask Stefan where he learned to lead. He always gave the same answer. "My mother." Fidel Powell had spent most of her career working as a nurse. She believed kindness wasn't something people practiced only when life was easy. It mattered most on the difficult days. Growing up, Stefan watched her leave home before sunrise and return long after dark. Some evenings she looked exhausted enough to fall asleep before dinner. Yet she still found the energy to ask about his homework. She still listened when he talked about school. She still reminded him that no achievement meant much if it came at the expense of treating people well. One memory remained especially clear. He had been 12 when he complained that another boy at school owned nicer shoes. Fidel listened quietly before placing 2 bowls of soup on the table. Then she smiled. "There's nothing wrong with wanting nice things." Stefan looked down. "I just wish we had more." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I understand." After a moment, she added softly, "Money can make life more comfortable." He nodded. "But kindness opens doors money never can." Young Stefan frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled. People may forget what you own. She tapped his chest gently. They rarely forget how you make them feel. Those words stayed with him. Years later, after success finally arrived, they became the standard by which he judged every decision. The morning passed in a blur of meetings, investors, product updates, expansion plans, contracts. By early afternoon, the office finally grew quiet. Stefan closed the door behind him and walked toward a bookshelf near the window. To anyone else, it looked ordinary. A row of books, a few framed awards, several family photographs. Hidden behind a small wooden keepsake box rested something no visitor had ever noticed. He slid it forward. Inside was an old volunteer identification badge from his college years. The photograph showed a much younger Stefan smiling awkwardly at the camera. He looked at it for several seconds before placing it back exactly where it belonged. The memory attached to that badge had never completely left him. He rarely allowed himself to think about it. Life had moved forward, or at least he believed it had. A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Maya stepped inside. "Sorry to interrupt." "No problem. Your car will be ready at 4. Stefan checked the time. "Perfect. You seem happier than usual." "I probably am." She folded her arms. "So?" He laughed. "You've been waiting all week to ask, haven't you?" "I've been waiting 2 months." He reached into a desk drawer. For the first time that day, a smile spread across his face that had nothing to do with business. Resting inside the drawer was a small velvet ring box. Stefan picked it up carefully. Maya's eyes widened. "Today's the day?" He nodded. "If I lose my nerve, remind me I survived pitching investors when I was 23. She laughed. "You'll be fine." "I hope so." "You don't sound like the man who convinced an entire boardroom to believe in a company that barely existed." "This feels much bigger." "It is." He turned the box over in his hands. "I've negotiated contracts worth millions." He smiled to himself. "But asking one woman to spend the rest of her life with me somehow feels far more intimidating." Maya grinned. "That's because the answer actually matters." "It definitely does." He slipped the ring into the inside pocket of his jacket. Everything had been planned carefully. Not because Shania expected grand gestures. She didn't. She appreciated thoughtful ones. Their first unexpected meeting had happened over 2 spilled cups of coffee. Their proposal would happen on the anniversary of that unforgettable afternoon. The botanical garden had become one of their favorite places. It felt peaceful, personal, a place filled with conversations instead of distractions. Exactly the kind of setting Shania loved. Stefan glanced through the office window. For once, he wasn't thinking about quarterly reports or shareholder meetings. His thoughts were already several miles away. As the afternoon came to a close, employees began gathering their things before heading home. Several waved as Stefan walked toward the elevators. "Have a great evening, Mr. Powell." "You too." Another employee called out. "Good luck today." Stefan stopped. "You know?" The young man smiled sheepishly. "The flower delivery gave it away." Stefan laughed. "I should have guessed." Before the elevator doors closed, voices echoed from across the hallway. "We're rooting for you." He shook his head, smiling all the way down to the lobby. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary afternoon. People hurried past with shopping bags. Friends chatted outside cafes. Parents pushed strollers along the sidewalks. To everyone around him, it was simply another day. To Stefan, it felt like the beginning of the future he had been waiting for. He adjusted his jacket, making sure the small velvet box remained safely tucked inside. Then he climbed into his car. He believed he was driving toward the happiest moment of his life. He had no way of knowing that before the sun disappeared, the future he had carefully planned would collide with a past he believed had been left behind forever. Long before Stefan found himself carrying an engagement ring through the botanical garden, his Saturday had begun with a much simpler goal. His mother had recommended a novel. "Don't order it online," she had told him over the phone. "Go to Bennett's bookstore. You'll enjoy wandering around more than clicking a button." She had been right. The little neighborhood bookstore felt welcoming the moment he stepped inside. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, soft music played in the background, and handwritten recommendation cards sat beneath nearly every book. For the first time all week, Stefan wasn't checking emails. He wandered through the mystery section, comparing 2 novels, when someone hurried around the corner balancing a stack of books in one arm and 2 cups of coffee in the other. Neither of them had time to react. The cups tipped. Coffee splashed across Stefan's jacket. "Oh my goodness!" the young woman gasped, placing the books on a nearby table before grabbing a handful of napkins. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking where I was going." She began dabbing at his sleeve, only to realize she was making herself even more flustered. I've officially ruined your day." Stefan looked down at the stain, then back at her anxious expression. "I've had much worse meetings than this." She blinked. "Meetings? Some investors leave bigger messes." For a second she stared at him. Then she laughed. A real laugh. The kind that escaped before she could stop it. "I'm still replacing your coffee. You don't have to." "I absolutely do. I was actually buying a book." "Then I'll replace your coffee and recommend a better book." Stefan smiled. "That sounds like a fair negotiation." She extended her hand. "I'm Shania." He shook it. "Stefan." She narrowed her eyes. "Wait." He sighed dramatically. "Should I be worried? You sound familiar." "I've been told that before." She snapped her fingers. "I know why." He raised an eyebrow. "You've just become the first customer in history to survive my terrible driving." He laughed. "I'll gladly accept that title." What should have lasted a few awkward seconds turned into an invitation to the bookstore cafe, then another cup of coffee, then another hour. Neither of them noticed. Their replacement coffee grew cold while they talked. Books became favorite movies. Movies became childhood memories. Childhood memories became dreams they had never admitted out loud. Stefan learned that Shania taught music at a neighborhood elementary school. She learned that Stefan enjoyed fixing old record players whenever he managed to steal a free evening. "You fix record players?" she asked. "They're less complicated than people." "I doubt that." "You've clearly never repaired one from the 70s. She smiled. "So what happens if you can't fix it?" "I keep trying." She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "I wish more people treated relationships that way." The sentence lingered between them. Not awkwardly, comfortably. When they finally stood to leave, nearly 4 hours had passed. Shania looked at the clock and covered her face. "I was supposed to meet my sister." Stefan checked his own phone. "I've ignored 7 missed calls." She laughed. "I guess we're both in trouble." As they reached the entrance, she hesitated. "I don't usually spend an afternoon talking to someone I just met." "I'm relieved." "Why?" "I was starting to think I wasn't that interesting." She rolled her eyes playfully. "You survived the coffee disaster." "I did. I suppose you've earned another conversation." That second conversation became dinner. Dinner became weekend walks through neighborhood markets. Weekend walks became traditions. Neither of them rushed. There were no dramatic speeches about falling in love. No promises made after a week. Everything happened naturally. One Saturday morning they wandered through a farmer's market sampling homemade jam. Shania pointed toward a vendor selling fresh peaches. "Those remind me of my grandfather." "Because he liked peaches?" "He grew them." "You helped?" "I mostly ate them." Stefan laughed. "An important contribution." She nodded proudly. "I considered it quality control." Another evening they found themselves watching a local jazz band perform in a small park. Shania quietly began swaying to the music. "You dance?" Stefan asked. "I've never been able to stand still when music starts." "You don't seem embarrassed." "I decided years ago that strangers are too busy thinking about themselves to judge me." She held out her hand. "Dance with me." "I don't know how." "Perfect." She pulled him toward the music anyway. People smiled as they stumbled through a song neither of them knew. When it ended, Stefan admitted something. "I think I stepped on your foot. Twice." "You noticed?" "I was trying to be polite." Shania had a habit of making everyday life feel special. If they cooked dinner together, she sang while chopping vegetables. If rain canceled their plans, she declared it the perfect excuse to build blanket forts in the living room and watch old movies. Whenever Stefan became buried beneath work, she quietly slipped handwritten notes into his briefcase. One afternoon, halfway through an exhausting meeting, he opened a folder and found a folded piece of paper. It read, "Reminder, even brilliant CEOs need lunch." Below it, she had drawn a smiling sandwich wearing a tiny necktie. Stefan couldn't help laughing. His board members looked confused. "You all right?" one of them asked. "Better than all right." He folded the note carefully. "I just remembered something important." Months later, another note appeared. "Someone is looking forward to hearing about your day. Don't make her wait too long." He kept every one of them, not inside a drawer, inside the same leather notebook where he stored his biggest business ideas. To him, they belonged together. Nearly 2 years after they first met, Stefan and Shania returned to a quiet lakeside park they both loved. The evening crowd had begun drifting home. The water reflected the last colors of the setting sun. Shania rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Can I ask you something?" "You usually do." She smiled. "What scares you?" He thought longer than she expected. "Losing someone before they know how much they mean to me." She lifted her head. "That's a very specific answer." "It is." Were you thinking about someone? Stefan looked across the lake. There was someone I cared about a long time ago. You loved her? He remained quiet for several seconds. I cared enough to hope she found the life she wanted. What happened? He gave a small shrug. Life pulled us in different directions. She studied his face. There was sadness there, not regret, not longing, just the quiet acceptance that some stories never receive the ending people expect. She slipped her hand into his. You don't have to tell me anymore. Thank you. I trust that if it's important. She smiled gently. You'll tell me when you're ready. A few weeks later, Stefan stood inside a small family-owned jewelry store. The owner placed 3 rings on a velvet cloth. They're all beautiful, she said. Stefan looked at each one before quietly sliding 2 aside. His attention settled on the simplest design. It doesn't have the biggest diamond, the owner observed. I know. You looked at it first. He smiled. Shania isn't impressed by expensive things. He picked up the ring. She notices thoughtful ones. The owner nodded. Then you've chosen the right ring. As Stefan left the store, he slipped the small velvet box safely into his jacket. He smiled all the way to his car. Everything felt right. The place, the timing, the future they had planned together. He couldn't wait to ask the question that would begin the next chapter of their lives. He never imagined another chapter. One he believed had ended years before, was already making its way back to him. Years before business magazines featured his photograph on their covers, Stefan's Saturdays looked very different. He wasn't meeting investors. He wasn't giving interviews. He wasn't thinking about stock prices or expansion plans. Every Saturday morning he drove across town to St. Catherine's Children's Hospital, where he volunteered a few hours each week. It wasn't a requirement for college. No professor offered extra credit. He simply believed that if he had free time, someone else could probably use it more than he could. His jobs changed from week to week. Sometimes he read adventure stories to children who couldn't leave their rooms. Sometimes he played board games with patients waiting for treatment. During the holidays, he helped decorate hallways with paper snowflakes, colorful drawings, and handmade decorations created by the children themselves. The work wasn't glamorous. It wasn't something he talked about, but those few hours each week became the part of college he remembered most. One afternoon, while searching for colored markers in the activity room, he heard laughter coming from the hallway. Not the polite kind, the loud, joyful kind that spread from one person to another. Curious, he stepped outside. A little boy sat in a wheelchair wearing an oversized pirate hat. Standing beside him was a young nursing student pretending to argue over a treasure map she had drawn on the back of a paper menu. You can't be the captain, the boy declared. Why not? She asked dramatically. Because captains have beards. She pretended to think very hard. That's a serious problem. It is. What if I borrow one? The little boy laughed so hard that 2 nurses passing by couldn't help smiling. Stefan found himself smiling too. He had never met the young woman before. But somehow she had transformed an ordinary hospital hallway into the most cheerful place in the building. That was the first time he saw Ellie Jasper. Their first conversation happened almost by accident. Stefan carried a box of puzzles into the activity room just as Ellie attempted to open the door while balancing an armful of books. The book slipped. Stefan caught 2 before they hit the floor. Nice save, Ellie said with a grateful smile. I had help. She looked around. I don't see anyone else. I meant gravity wasn't trying very hard. She laughed. I'll remember that excuse. Together they gathered the remaining books. When everything had been stacked neatly on the table, Ellie extended her hand. I'm Ellie. Stefan, you're one of the weekend volunteers? I am. I've seen you reading to the children. Stefan looked surprised. You noticed? You use different voices for every character. He looked slightly embarrassed. I thought the walls were the only audience. The walls aren't nearly as entertained as the children. That simple conversation lasted only a few minutes. The friendship that followed lasted much longer. Whenever their schedules crossed, they naturally worked together. If Stefan organized games, Ellie joined in. If Ellie planned an arts and crafts afternoon, Stefan stayed to help clean up afterward. Neither of them forced conversation. It simply happened. Stefan admired many things about Ellie. None of them had anything to do with appearance. She remembered every child's favorite story. She knew which patients preferred quiet conversations and which wanted someone to joke with them. She greeted janitors with the same warmth she showed surgeons. She learned parents' names instead of calling them mom or dad. One winter evening, a young patient became terrified after learning he would need surgery the following morning. No one could calm him. Stefan watched from the hallway as Ellie quietly pulled up a chair beside his bed. She didn't promise everything would be perfect. She didn't offer speeches filled with impossible guarantees. Instead, she asked, "Do you know my grandmother's secret?" The little boy sniffled. "No. When I was scared, she told me to borrow courage." He frowned. "How?" She smiled. "Until you find your own, you borrow a little from someone who cares about you." The boy looked at her carefully. "Can I borrow yours?" "You can have as much as you need." She stayed with him for hours, reading stories and humming soft songs until his breathing finally slowed and his eyes closed. Stefan never forgot that moment, not because it was dramatic, because it revealed the kind of person Ellie truly was when no one expected anything from her. Weeks turned into months. Without realizing it, Stefan began looking forward to Saturdays for reasons that had nothing to do with volunteering. After each shift, he and Ellie often stopped at a small cafe a few blocks away. The coffee wasn't particularly good. The conversations were. They talked about everything: books, music, family traditions, dreams they hadn't shared with many people. Ellie hoped to become a pediatric nurse and eventually work in places where children had little access to medical care. "I know the hours will be difficult," she admitted one afternoon, "but if I can make one child's day less frightening." She smiled. "I'll be exactly where I'm supposed to be." Stefan stirred his coffee thoughtfully. "I want to build something that creates opportunities for people. A company? One day." She looked at him. "I think you will. You sound very confident." "I've met enough people to recognize determination when I see it." He smiled. "And what if I fail?" She shrugged. "Then you'll learn. And if I succeed?" "I hope success never changes the reason you started." Her words settled quietly in his heart. Years later, he would remember them almost as often as his mother's advice. As graduation approached, reality arrived with it. Stefan accepted a position with a rapidly growing technology firm, hoping to gain experience before starting his own company. Ellie received an offer from an international medical relief organization. The opportunity would take her far from home. The night before she left, they walked through a riverside park neither of them wanted to leave. "I wish the timing were different," Stefan admitted. "So do I." He looked at her. "But I don't want you turning down your dream because of me." She smiled, though her eyes glistened. "And I don't want you staying where you are because you're afraid to chase yours." They stood quietly for a moment. Finally, Stefan reached for her hand. "We'll make this work. We will. We'll call. Every chance we get, we'll write. I'll even forgive your terrible handwriting." He laughed. "That might be asking too much." She squeezed his hand. "No matter how busy life becomes." She looked into his eyes. "Don't stop believing in the person you are today." "I won't." Neither of them realized those would become some of the last peaceful words they shared face to face. For a while, they kept every promise. Phone calls stretched late into the night. Emails arrived almost daily. Photographs traveled across oceans. Ellie sent pictures of smiling children she had met during her assignments. Stefan shared updates about the small company he dreamed of building. Life felt busy, hopeful, possible. Then the gaps between conversations slowly grew. Assignments moved Ellie from one location to another. Internet access became unreliable. Letters arrived weeks late. Some never arrived at all. Stefan called numbers that no longer worked. Ellie mailed letters to addresses where he no longer lived. Each believed the other had simply become harder to reach. Neither understood how many messages had been lost before they were ever delivered. Months became a year. The silence grew heavier. Eventually, Stefan stopped expecting his phone to ring. He convinced himself that Ellie had found a new life and deserved the chance to live it without being tied to the past. With quiet sadness, he placed their memories into a corner of his heart and turned his attention toward building the future. He never imagined that the future he was creating would one day collide with that forgotten chapter in the most unexpected way imaginable. Stefan woke before his alarm. For a few seconds, he simply lay there, staring at the ceiling with the unmistakable feeling that this day would remain with him for the rest of his life. Business presentations had never made him nervous. Negotiating contracts worth millions never caused his heart to race. But asking one question, that was different. He reached for the small velvet box resting on his nightstand. Opening it one more time, he smiled at the ring. "I hope she loves it as much as I love her," he murmured. His phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Good luck today. Remember, speak from your heart. That's the man she'll always choose." Stefan smiled. He replied with a single sentence. "I'll call you tonight with good news." He slipped the phone into his pocket, closed the ring box, and left for the office, convinced that before sunset he would be planning a wedding with the woman he loved. Across town, Shania finished helping her students rehearse for the school's spring music program. The The children gathered around the piano, each trying to sing louder than the last. When the rehearsal ended, one little girl ran over and hugged her. "Miss Henry." "Yes, my mom says you smile all the time." Shania laughed. "Your mom has clearly never seen me before my first cup of coffee." The girl giggled. "Are you doing something fun today?" "I think so." "What?" "I'm meeting someone very special." The little girl's eyes widened. "Is it your boyfriend?" Shania nodded. "He said he has a surprise." The children immediately began guessing. "Maybe he's taking you to a concert, a picnic, the zoo, a giant ice cream." Shania laughed so hard she had to wipe away a tear. "I honestly have no idea." One of the teachers walked over with a knowing smile. "If he keeps looking at you the way he did at the school fundraiser." She paused. "I'd expect something memorable." Shania blushed. "I think you're reading too much into it." "Maybe." The teacher smiled. "But don't be surprised if today changes your life." Shania shook her head, amused. "If it changes my weekend plans, I'll already be impressed." She truly believed she was heading out for an ordinary anniversary date. Stefan left work earlier than usual. Instead of driving straight to the botanical garden, he made one brief stop. A neighborhood florist. The owner looked up the moment he entered. "Mr. Powell." "Please." Stefan smiled. "Today I'm just Stefan." She laughed. "I've been waiting all morning." She disappeared into the cooler and returned carrying a bouquet of white and pale pink roses. "They're beautiful. I thought she'd like something elegant without being overwhelming. You remembered. You told me she prefers flowers that look natural." Stefan accepted the bouquet. "You remembered that too. I pay attention." The florist smiled warmly. "I have a feeling she does the same for you." He nodded. "She does." As he reached for his wallet, she gently raised a hand. "Already taken care of." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Your mother stopped by yesterday." "My mother? She insisted on paying." Stefan laughed quietly. "That sounds exactly like her." The florist handed him a small envelope. "She asked me to give you this after you picked up the flowers." Inside was a handwritten note. "Love isn't measured by the size of a ring. It's measured by the life two people build together. I'm proud of the man you've become." For a long moment, Stefan simply stood there smiling. Then he folded the note carefully and tucked it beside the ring. The botanical garden wasn't the city's largest attraction. It didn't need to be. It was peaceful. Tree-lined paths curved around small ponds where ducks drifted lazily through the water. Benches invited visitors to slow down instead of rushing toward the next destination. Seasonal flowers painted each section with different colors, making every visit feel slightly different from the last. Stefan arrived early. He wanted to make sure every detail was exactly as planned. The violinist was already tuning his instrument beneath a nearby gazebo. They greeted each other with a friendly handshake. "Everything ready?" "It is." "Nothing too dramatic." The musician smiled. "You said simple." "I meant it. I'll let the music stay in the background." "Perfect." A garden coordinator approached. "Your reservation is confirmed." She pointed toward the rose garden. "We've kept that area open just as you requested." Stefan looked around. It was exactly how he had imagined. No grand stage, no flashing cameras, just a beautiful afternoon shared with the woman he hoped would soon become his wife. A few minutes later, Shania arrived. The moment she saw Stefan standing near the entrance, she smiled. "There you are." "There you are." She laughed. "You copied me." "I absolutely did." She walked over and accepted the bouquet. "They're beautiful. I had excellent advice." "From your mother?" "How did you know?" "Because she has wonderful taste." They began strolling through the gardens at an easy pace. Neither hurried. They pointed out flowers they couldn't identify, stopped to admire butterflies moving from blossom to blossom, laughed when a curious squirrel briefly followed them, apparently hoping for a snack. Shania slipped her hand into Stefan's. "Do you remember our first date?" "I remember the coffee. You wore a white jacket." "I did. I ruined it. You improved it." She looked at him. "How?" "It gave me an excuse to spend the afternoon with you." She smiled. "I suppose I should apologize again." "Please don't. I've been carrying the guilt for 2 years." "I've been carrying gratitude." She gently bumped his shoulder. "You always know the right thing to say, only when I'm telling the truth." They reached the rose garden just as the violinist began playing a gentle melody. Shania looked around. "I forgot how peaceful this place is." Stefan studied her expression. She looked completely relaxed, completely unaware. "I'm glad we came back," she said. "So am I." She turned toward him. "You've been smiling all afternoon." "Have I? More than usual. I've had a good reason." What is it? He took a slow breath. I've been thinking about how much life has changed since that first cup of coffee. She nodded. So have I. You've become my favorite part of every day. Her smile softened. And you've become mine. Stefan reached into his jacket. His fingers closed around the velvet box. This was the moment he had imagined countless times. Every word, every breath, every hope. He stepped back, then slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Around them, conversations faded as visitors quietly noticed what was unfolding. The violin continued playing. Children stopped running. Several couples smiled at one another before turning their attention towards Stefan and Shania. He opened the ring box. His voice trembled, not from fear of speaking in front of strangers, but because no achievement in his life had ever carried more meaning than this one. Shania. She looked down at him with tears already forming. You've made every ordinary day feel extraordinary. A small laugh escaped him. I practiced this speech for weeks. She smiled through her tears. I can tell. And somehow I'm forgetting every line. You don't need them. He looked into her eyes. Before I met you, I thought success meant reaching the top. He shook his head gently. You taught me that the view means very little unless you're sharing it with someone you love. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You've become my safest place, my closest friend, the person I can't imagine growing old without. He lifted the ring. Shania Henry, she whispered through a trembling smile. Yes. She drew one careful breath. I'll, a small voice interrupted. Daddy? The world seemed to stop. The music ended mid-note. Stefan slowly turned. At the edge of the gathering stood two little girls, their hands tightly clasped together. Everything after that happened exactly as no one could have imagined. For several long seconds, no one moved. Stefan remained on one knee, the open ring box still in his hand. Shania slowly turned toward the direction of the small voice. Standing just beyond the circle of onlookers were two little girls. They looked almost identical. Each wore a neatly pressed dress that had clearly been cared for many times. Their shoes were clean but noticeably worn around the edges. The older girl held her younger sister's hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned pale. Neither child appeared lost. Neither looked frightened enough to run away. Instead, they stood there with the quiet determination of children who had spent a long time searching for someone they believed they would finally recognize. Stefan stared at them. His heartbeat seemed louder than every sound around him. He had never seen them before. At least, he didn't think he had. The older girl swallowed. Daddy, she whispered again. We found you. The words landed with a weight no one there could understand. Stefan slowly rose to his feet. His lips parted, but no words came. He searched the girls' faces as though hoping his memory would suddenly explain everything. Nothing did. The ring box slipped from his trembling fingers. It landed softly in the grass, still open. No one bent to pick it up. Not Stefan, not Shania, not even the curious strangers gathered nearby. Every eye remained fixed on the two children. Shania glanced at Stefan. She had expected immediate confusion, maybe even a nervous laugh. Instead, she saw something else. He looked completely shaken. Not guilty, not defensive, simply overwhelmed. She quietly stepped closer to him. Stefan, she said gently, do you know them? He answered without taking his eyes off the girls. He stopped. I don't know. It was the most honest answer he could give. The older twin carefully slipped a tiny backpack from her shoulders. She unzipped the front pocket with slow, careful movements as though protecting something precious. Finally, she removed a photograph sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. The edges had become soft with age. She walked toward Stefan one cautious step at a time. When she reached him, she stretched out both hands. This belongs to you. Stefan accepted it almost automatically. The moment his eyes met the photograph, every bit of color drained from his face. A much younger version of himself smiled back from the picture. Standing beside him was Ellie. Both of them were laughing outside the children's hospital where they had volunteered during college. He remembered the exact afternoon. A little girl had insisted they pose after decorating the pediatric wing for a holiday celebration. Neither of them had imagined that simple photograph would survive all those years. His fingers tightened around it. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Ellie. The older girl's shoulders relaxed. Mommy said you would remember. The younger twin stepped forward until she stood beside her sister. Our mommy kept that picture safe. Stefan looked from the photograph to the girls, then back again. His thoughts refused to settle. How did they have this? Where had Ellie been? Why now? Why here? His mind raced through every possibility. None of them made sense. He looked at the older child. "What's your name?" She smiled shyly. "My name is Kiki." The younger girl spoke next. "And I'm Starlight." "Kiki," Stefan repeated softly. "Starlight." The names felt unfamiliar, yet hearing them stirred an emotion he couldn't explain. He lowered himself until he was at eye level with them. "Where's your mother?" The sisters exchanged a brief glance. Neither answered immediately. Around them, whispers began spreading through the crowd. "What is happening? Does he know those children? Who are they talking about?" The violinist quietly packed away his instrument, understanding that this was no longer a celebration. Garden staff gently encouraged visitors to continue walking. Some did. Many remained nearby, unable to pull themselves away from the unfolding scene. Shania ignored every whisper. She looked only at Stefan, then at the girls. There was fear in the children's eyes, not the fear of punishment, the fear of losing hope. Shania knelt beside them with a gentle smile. "Hi." The girls looked at her uncertainly. "My name is Shania." Neither child spoke. "Would it be all right if I asked you something?" Kiki nodded. "Were you looking for Stefan today?" "Yes." "For a long time?" Another nod. "We almost thought we'd never find him." Those simple words quietly broke something inside Stefan. Kiki reached into her backpack again. This time she removed a folded envelope. The paper had been opened and closed many times. She held it toward Stefan. "Mommy told us to give you this." His hands trembled as he accepted it. Written across the front were just 3 words. "For Stefan Powell." The handwriting stopped him cold. He recognized it immediately. Ellie's. No matter how many years had passed, he would have recognized those letters anywhere. He carefully unfolded the page. Before he could begin reading, Kiki spoke. "Mommy said you should read it when you found us." Stefan looked up. "When?" His voice caught. "When did she tell you that?" The girls lowered their eyes. Neither answered. The silence itself felt like an answer he wasn't ready to hear. Stefan unfolded the page with extraordinary care. The first line blurred before his eyes as emotion rushed through him. He blinked hard and began again. "Stefan, if you're reading this, then our girls found you." I prayed they would. His breathing became uneven. "There are things you deserve to know, things I should have told you years ago. I tried more times than I can count, but life kept placing oceans, closed doors, and unanswered letters between us." His fingers tightened around the paper. Shania watched quietly. She didn't interrupt. She understood that every sentence was pulling Stefan into a part of his life he had never expected to revisit. He continued reading. "Please don't blame the girls. None of this was their choice." He stopped. His eyes filled. The page shook in his hands. Stefan slowly lowered the letter. He looked at Kiki, then at Starlight. "When did you leave your mother today?" The younger twin answered first. "This morning. Is she waiting for you?" The sisters exchanged another glance. Kiki gently bit her lower lip before speaking. "No." Stefan's heart sank. "Then where is she?" Kiki's eyes filled with tears she had been trying so hard to hold back. "She's in the hospital." A long silence followed. Then Starlight whispered the words that took away whatever strength remained in him. "The doctor said Mommy is very sick." Stefan closed his eyes. For years he had believed Ellie had simply disappeared from his life. Now he realized she had been fighting battles he had never known existed. Only minutes earlier, Stefan believed this afternoon would end with wedding plans, happy phone calls, and celebrations. Instead, he found himself holding an old photograph in one hand, and a letter from the woman he once loved in the other. Beside him stood the woman he hoped to marry. In front of him stood 2 little girls who believed he was their father. Nothing about the day made sense anymore. Yet one thing had become painfully clear. Whatever answers waited ahead, they couldn't begin here. Stefan looked at the sisters with quiet determination. "I'm going with you." Kiki's shoulders relaxed for the first time. Starlight reached for her sister's hand again. Beside him, Shania took one slow breath. She knew the proposal had been interrupted. What she didn't yet know was whether the future she and Stefan had imagined together still existed, or whether the next few hours would change all of their lives forever. The ride across the city was almost silent. Stefan sat in the front passenger seat of his car while his driver focused on the road. Shania sat in the back with Kiki and Starlight. Neither little girl spoke much. They simply held each other's hands. Every now and then Starlight leaned her head against her sister's shoulder, as though drawing comfort from being close. Stefan glanced into the rearview mirror more times than he could count. Each time he found himself studying the girls, the shape of Kiki's smile, the determined expression on Starlight's face, tiny details that meant nothing, yet somehow felt impossible to ignore. Finally, Stefan spoke. "Have you both eaten today?" The sisters looked at one another. "We had toast," Kiki answered. "And juice," Starlight added. Shania offered a gentle smile. "When this is over, we'll make sure you have a proper meal." "Thank you," Kiki said politely. Her manners reminded Stefan of someone. He couldn't place who, not yet. Unable to wait any longer, Stefan unfolded Ellie's letter again. He read the next lines carefully. "I know this will come as a shock. If I could have told you years ago, I would have. I searched for you more than once, but every trail seemed to end before it reached you." He frowned. That made no sense. His company had been public for years. His interviews were everywhere. How could Ellie have failed to find him? He continued. "There were times I came close. Then another assignment took me somewhere else. Later, my health began failing, and every plan became another promise I couldn't keep." Stefan closed his eyes for a moment. The words carried no anger, only sadness. Shania quietly asked, "May I read it later?" Stefan nodded. Of course. There were no secrets now. Not anymore. The car turned into the entrance of Riverside Community Medical Center. It wasn't a large private hospital. It served ordinary families, teachers, mechanics, retirees, children. Stefan stepped out first and opened the rear door. Kiki climbed out, then Starlight. Neither girl ran ahead. Instead, they waited patiently. "This way," Kiki said softly. She seemed to know every hallway, every elevator, every turn. That realization settled heavily on Stefan. Children only knew hospitals this well when they had spent far too much time inside them. As they reached the third floor, a nurse looked up from the station. Her eyes immediately found the twins. "There you are." "We found him," Starlight announced proudly. The nurse's expression shifted toward quiet relief. Then she looked at Stefan. "So," she said gently, "you're Stefan." He nodded. "Yes. I've hoped this day would come." The nurse introduced herself as Angela. "I've been taking care of Ellie for several weeks." Stefan swallowed. "Is she awake?" Angela hesitated. "She's resting at the moment." "Can I see her?" "You can." She lowered her voice. "But before you do," she motioned toward a small family room nearby, "there are a few things you need to understand." They stepped inside. Angela folded her hands. "Ellie never stopped trying to reach you." Stefan looked up immediately. "What do you mean? She wrote letters." "So did I. She changed countries several times during humanitarian assignments. I changed apartments." Angela nodded. "Neither of you knew where the other was." Shania listened quietly. No accusations, no assumptions, only facts. Angela continued. "When Ellie returned to the United States 6 years ago, she began looking for you again. Then why didn't she contact me?" "She tried." Stefan stared at her. Angela opened a folder and removed several envelopes. Each one had been returned to sender. Wrong address, undeliverable, moved. One by one, Stefan looked at them. Every envelope carried his name. Every one had failed to reach him. Angela spoke carefully. "When Ellie learned she was expecting twins, she hoped she'd find you before they were born." Stefan slowly sat down. The room suddenly felt smaller. Kiki and Starlight arrived earlier than expected. Angela smiled faintly. "They've been fighters since their first breath." The twins looked at each other proudly. "They spent weeks in neonatal care." Stefan's heart tightened. "Ellie stayed with them every day." Angela continued. "She worked whenever she could, accepted temporary nursing positions, raised the girls with help from friends." "She never spoke badly about you." Stefan looked up. "Never?" Angela shook her head. "Whenever the girls asked about their father." Her voice softened. "She always said the same thing." Kiki quietly finished the sentence. "He's a good man." Starlight nodded. "Mommy always said that." Stefan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I should have been there," Angela answered gently. "You didn't know. I still should have been there." Shania finally reached for his hand. He looked at her. Instead of disappointment, he found compassion. "We can't change yesterday," she said softly, "but we can decide what happens today." Stefan lowered his eyes. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't start by fixing years." She gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You start with the next hour." Kiki looked at Stefan. "Does that mean you're staying?" He turned toward her. "If you'll let me." His voice grew steadier. "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time since arriving, both girls smiled. Angela stood. "She's awake now." No one spoke. Stefan suddenly found himself more nervous than he had been before any board meeting. His legs felt unusually heavy as they stepped back into the hallway. Room 318. The number seemed ordinary, yet it held the answers to years of unanswered questions. Angela rested her hand on the doorknob. She's been hoping for this moment. Stefan drew a careful breath. So have I. Angela opened the door quietly. Sunlight filtered through the window. A woman rested against the raised hospital bed, reading a well-worn novel. The sound of the opening door made her glance up. For a heartbeat, she simply stared. The book slipped from her hands onto the blanket. Neither of them spoke. Years disappeared inside one silent look. Finally, Ellie whispered the only word she could manage. Stefan. He took one slow step into the room. So! His voice trembled. I finally found you! For a long moment, neither of them moved. The years between them seemed to fill every corner of the room. Stefan searched Ellie's face. Time had changed them both. She looked older than the memories he had carried for so long, but her gentle smile was unmistakable. Ellie looked at him as though she were making certain he wasn't another dream she would wake from. Finally, she smiled through tears. You still stand exactly the same when you're nervous. Stefan let out a quiet, emotional laugh. And you still notice everything. Her eyes drifted toward Kiki and Starlight. The twins hurried to her bedside. We found him, Mommy. You were right. He remembered you. Ellie wrapped an arm around both girls. I never doubted he would. Stefan stepped closer. I don't even know where to begin. Ellie looked at him kindly. Then don't begin with apologies. Stefan pulled a chair beside the bed. I wrote to you. I know. I called. I know. I even contacted the organization where you were working. Ellie nodded. By the time they answered, I'd already been transferred. Stefan lowered his head. I thought you'd chosen another life. She gave a sad smile. I thought you had too. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, just heavy with everything they had never been able to say. Ellie reached toward the bedside drawer and removed a small bundle tied neatly with a blue ribbon. She handed it to him. What is this? Your letters. Stefan looked confused. I don't understand. They arrived. He frowned. I thought you said, not when you sent them. She looked down at her hands. They were forwarded from one address to another. Some took months. One took nearly 2 years. Stefan untied the ribbon. Every envelope carried his handwriting. Some had never even been opened. Ellie noticed the question in his eyes. When they finally reached me. Her voice softened. Life had already become. Stefan lied. There. Ellie nodded gently. Yes. He struggled to find the words. I didn't know. I know. You never told me. I wanted to. She took a slow breath. When I learned I was pregnant, I tried to reach you immediately. She smiled sadly. I thought you'd answer the first phone call. I changed numbers after graduation. I learned that. I moved twice. I learned that too. Each sentence revealed another missed opportunity. Not because either of them had walked away, because life had quietly placed obstacle after obstacle between them. Ellie continued. By the time I returned home, the girls had already been born. I kept telling myself. She paused. I'll find him next month. Then another assignment came. Then another. Stefan looked at the floor. I missed their first words. Ellie nodded. Yes, I missed their birthdays. Yes, I missed everything. She reached across the bed and gently placed her hand over his. But not because you chose to. Starlight climbed carefully onto the chair beside her mother's bed. Kiki always asked about Daddy. Kiki looked embarrassed. I was curious. You both were, Ellie said with a smile. Stefan turned toward them. What did your mom tell you? Kiki answered first. She said you were kind. Starlight nodded. And that you helped children. She said you laughed a lot. Kiki smiled. And that you made funny voices when you read stories. Stefan laughed softly. I haven't done that in years. You should. Starlight grinned. They're really funny. The room filled with gentle laughter. For the first time since arriving, the conversation felt less like strangers meeting, and more like a family discovering itself. Shania had remained quietly near the window, allowing Stefan and Ellie the space they needed. Ellie looked toward her. You must be Shania. Shania stepped closer. I am. Ellie smiled warmly. The girls told me you were kind to them. They were scared. So were you. Shania nodded. Honestly. Very. I'm sorry. You don't owe me an apology. Ellie looked surprised. Shania continued. I walked into a proposal. She smiled gently. You've spent years carrying something much heavier. Ellie's eyes filled again. I never wanted to hurt anyone. I know. There was no bitterness in Shania's voice, only compassion. Stefan watched the two women with quiet gratitude. Neither had chosen the situation they were standing in, yet both had chosen kindness. Stefan looked at Kiki, then at Starlight. I don't know if you'll ever be able to forgive how many years I missed. Kiki quickly shook her head. You didn't know. I still miss them. Starlight leaned forward. You can come to my next birthday. He smiled. I'd love that. And my school concert. I'll be there. And when I lose another tooth. Stefan laughed. I'll be there for that too. Kiki studied him carefully. You really mean it? He looked directly into her eyes. I've spent years missing moments I didn't even know existed. His voice grew steadier. I'm not planning to miss another one. The twins smiled at each other. Their mother quietly wiped away another tear. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the hospital floor as the room settled into a peaceful silence. No one could recover the birthdays that had passed. No one could replace the years that had been lost. Those pages of their lives had already been written. But another chapter had just begun. Stefan stood and walked to the window for a moment. He looked out across the city. Only that morning he had believed his future was simple. A proposal, a celebration, a wedding. Now the future looked completely different. It was more complicated, more uncertain, yet somehow it also felt fuller than anything he had ever imagined. He turned back toward the room. Ellie was smiling at her daughters. The girls were talking over each other, eager to tell her every detail about finding him. Shania stood quietly nearby, listening with a gentle smile. For the first time that day, Stefan realized something important. The question was no longer whether he had unexpectedly become a father. He already was. The question now was whether he could become the father Kiki and Starlight deserved. As he watched the twins laugh together, he made a silent promise. No matter how difficult the road ahead became, he would spend the rest of his life making sure they never had to search for him again. Stefan returned to the hospital early the next morning, not because anyone had asked him to, because he couldn't imagine starting his day anywhere else. As he stepped off the elevator carrying a paper bag from a neighborhood bakery, he spotted Kiki and Starlight sitting in the family lounge, surrounded by crayons, puzzle pieces, and coloring books. The moment they noticed him, both girls looked up. Daddy! This time the word didn't catch him by surprise. It warmed him. He smiled as they hurried over. I brought breakfast. Starlight peeked inside the bag. Cinnamon rolls. I wasn't sure which ones you liked. We like all of them, Kiki answered with complete confidence. I had a feeling that might be the case. The three of them settled around a small table. For the first few minutes, the conversation was wonderfully ordinary. Favorite cartoon, favorite animals, favorite ice cream. Stefan listened more than he spoke. Every answer felt like another piece of a puzzle he wished he'd started years earlier. It didn't take long for Stefan to realize that, although the girls looked almost identical, they couldn't have been more different. Kiki thought before she spoke. She loved reading and always carried a book somewhere in her backpack. If she didn't know the answer to a question, she admitted it without embarrassment. I'll learn, she would simply say. Starlight, on the other hand, approached life like every day was an adventure waiting to happen. She asked questions every few minutes. Why are elevator buttons round? Why do birds always look busy? Do fish ever get thirsty? Stefan laughed more that morning than he had in weeks. You ask a lot of questions. I know. Do you ever run out? She thought for a second. I've never tried. Even Kiki giggled. Watching the sisters together, Stefan understood something his mother had often told him. Every child has their own way of seeing the world. The greatest gift an adult can offer is taking the time to notice. After breakfast, Starlight disappeared briefly and returned carrying a well-loved storybook. Mommy says you're really good at voices. Stefan looked toward Ellie. She smiled from her chair. I may have mentioned that once or twice. More than once, Kiki corrected. Starlight handed him the book. Will you read? He hesitated for only a moment. All right. The girls climbed onto the sofa beside him. Stefan opened the first page. At first he read quietly. Then he remembered the way children at the hospital used to laugh whenever he gave each character a different voice. Before long he was doing exactly that. A brave rabbit sounded bold. A sleepy bear yawned through every sentence. A tiny mouse squeaked with dramatic importance. The sisters burst into laughter. Even a passing nurse paused outside the lounge door, smiling as she listened for a moment before continuing down the hallway. When the story ended, Starlight clapped. Again! Stefan laughed. I think that's the nicest review I've ever received. Later that afternoon, Angela introduced Stefan and Shania to Ellie's physician, Dr. Marcus Bennett. He greeted them warmly before leading them into a private consultation room. "I know you have questions," he said. Stefan nodded. "More than I can count." Dr. Bennett folded his hands. "Ellie has been living with a serious autoimmune illness for several years." Stefan listened without interrupting. "There have been periods where treatment worked well." The doctor paused, "and periods where it didn't. Is she going to recover?" Dr. Bennett chose his words carefully. "Our goal is to help her regain strength and improve her quality of life." Stefan understood what the doctor wasn't promising. Nothing about the future was guaranteed. "What does she need most right now?" he asked. "Consistent treatment, time to rest, and the support of people who care about her." Stefan answered without hesitation. "She has that." That evening, after the girls had fallen asleep in reclining chairs beside Ellie's room, Stefan and Ellie spoke quietly. "I've been thinking," he began. Ellie smiled. "That usually means you're about to solve a problem. I'm going to rearrange my schedule. You don't have to. I do. My company will survive if I attend fewer meetings." She looked at him. "You've worked your whole life to build it. I built it so life could become better." He glanced toward the sleeping twins. "If it keeps me away from them now." He shook his head. "Then I've forgotten why I wanted success in the first place." Ellie didn't argue. She simply reached over and squeezed his hand. "I always believed you'd be an amazing father." He smiled sadly. "I wish I'd had the chance to prove you right sooner." The following afternoon, Stefan's mother arrived at the hospital carrying a homemade casserole balanced carefully in her hands. She looked around the room before her eyes settled on the twins. For a heartbeat, everyone remained still. Then Fidel walked over slowly. "Softly. You must be Kiki." The older girl nodded. "And you're Starlight." "Yes," Fidel smiled. "I've wanted to meet you both for longer than you could possibly know." The girls looked towards Stefan. He gave them an encouraging nod. Without another word, Starlight stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Fidel. The older woman closed her eyes as she returned the hug. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "I think," she laughed through tears. "I've just been promoted to grandma." Kiki smiled. "I've never had a grandma before." "Well," Fidel replied warmly, "I have a feeling we're going to make up for lost time." Family began to fit together in ways none of them could have imagined only 2 days earlier. As the week unfolded, Stefan's calendar changed completely. Morning meetings became video calls. Board presentations were delegated to trusted executives. Every afternoon ended at the hospital. Sometimes he helped Kiki with her reading. Sometimes he colored with Starlight. Sometimes all four of them simply sat beside Ellie's bed talking about ordinary things. Ordinary became precious. One evening, as they watched the sunset through the hospital window, Kiki quietly slipped her hand into Stefan's. "Can I ask something?" "Anything, if Mommy gets better." She hesitated. "Can we all go to the botanical garden together?" Stefan smiled. "I'd like that very much." Starlight looked up from her coloring book. "And this time," she said with complete seriousness, "nobody interrupts anything." The adults laughed, not because the memory was no longer painful, but because for the first time since that unforgettable afternoon, hope had begun to replace uncertainty. It wasn't the future any of them had planned. Yet as Stefan looked around the room, he realized it was becoming a future worth protecting with everything he had. Nearly 2 weeks passed with encouraging signs. Ellie regained some of her strength. She walked short distances through the hospital corridor with a therapist. Kiki and Starlight filled the room with laughter almost every afternoon. Stefan settled into a new routine that no longer felt unfamiliar. Every morning began with work. Every evening belonged to his family. For the first time in years, he no longer measured his days by business accomplishments. He measured them by moments: a shared meal, a bedtime story, a smile from Ellie, a question from Starlight, a thoughtful observation from Kiki. It wasn't the life he had expected. It was becoming the life he treasured. Then, on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Angela stepped quietly into the family lounge. Her expression told Stefan something before she spoke. "Stefan." He immediately stood. "What happened?" "Ellie needs you." Without another word, he hurried toward her room. Ellie looked exhausted. She managed a gentle smile when Stefan entered. "I didn't mean to scare everyone. You don't have to apologize." Dr. Bennett joined them a few moments later. He spoke calmly. The latest tests show that Ellie's condition has become more complicated. Stefan felt his stomach tighten. What does that mean? We're adjusting her treatment. Will it work? We believe it's the best path forward. The doctor's honesty was reassuring without offering false certainty. There will be difficult days, he continued, but Ellie is strong, and she's responding with remarkable determination. After he left, the room remained quiet. Ellie reached for Stefan's hand. You know what worries me the most? What? The girls. They need their mother. They need you too. Stefan nodded. They'll always have me. She searched his face. You promise? I promise. There wasn't a hint of hesitation. That evening, Shania found Stefan standing alone in the hospital courtyard. He was looking at the city lights without really seeing them. She walked over quietly. You skipped dinner. I wasn't hungry. She stood beside him. You've been carrying the weight of everyone else's worries. He smiled faintly. I haven't been doing a very good job of hiding it. You don't have to. For several moments, they simply stood together. Finally, Stefan spoke. I keep thinking about the proposal. Shania looked at him. So do I. I'm sorry. She shook her head. You didn't create this. I still feel like I let you down. She turned toward him. You asked me to spend my life with you. Yes. You never promised life would be simple. He looked at her, surprised. She smiled gently. The man I fell in love with is the same man sitting beside children's hospital beds, reading stories and keeping promises. She slipped her hand into his. If anything. Her voice softened. I've learned even more about who you are. Emotion filled Stefan's eyes. I don't deserve you. She laughed quietly. I'll decide that. The following morning, Kiki found Stefan sitting in the family lounge with 2 untouched cups of coffee. She climbed into the chair beside him. Daddy? Yes. Can I ask something important? You never have to ask permission. She looked down at her hands. Are grown-ups always scared? He smiled gently. More often than children think. Then how do they keep going? Stefan considered the question carefully. They remember who they're being strong for. Kiki nodded slowly. I've been trying to be brave for Mommy. I know, she looked at him, but sometimes I want someone to be brave for me. Without saying a word, Stefan opened his arms. She leaned against him. You don't have to carry everything, he whispered. I'm here now. She closed her eyes. I know. A few days later, Ellie gathered everyone in her room. Stefan, Shania, Fidel, Kiki, Starlight. She looked around the room before speaking. I've been thinking about what happens after I leave the hospital. Starlight smiled. We're all going home. Ellie returned the smile. That's certainly the plan. Then she looked at Stefan. The girls have spent enough years wondering where their father was. She reached for his hand. I don't want them wondering again. You won't have to ask. I know. She turned toward the twins. How would you feel about spending more time with your dad? Starlight answered first. Every day. Kiki nodded. And weekends. Stefan laughed. I think we can arrange both. The room felt lighter. Not because every problem had disappeared. Because hope had become stronger than fear. Later that evening, Stefan asked Shania to take a short walk through the hospital's healing garden. The flowers weren't arranged in perfect rows. Children had decorated small stepping stones with colorful handprints and painted messages about courage and hope. Stefan stopped beside a wooden bench. I've been thinking. Shania smiled. I know that look. I never actually heard your answer. She laughed. You interrupted me. I did. Well. She folded her arms playfully. I'm waiting. Stefan reached into his jacket. The same velvet ring box rested inside. He had carried it almost every day since the proposal. He opened it. Shania Henry. She laughed through happy tears. You really brought it? I wasn't willing to give up that easily. He took a slow breath. I love you. I love the girls. I care deeply about Ellie. And I know our future won't look anything like the one I imagined. He smiled. But if you're still willing. Still like to spend the rest of my life with you. Shania looked at him for only a second before smiling. My answer hasn't changed. She held out her hand. Yes. This time nothing interrupted them. Stefan slipped the ring onto her finger. They embraced quietly beneath the evening sky. There were no strangers watching, no applause, just 2 people choosing one another with complete understanding of the life ahead. When they returned to Ellie's room, Kiki noticed the ring immediately. She gasped. He asked again. Starlight clapped excitedly. And this time I remembered not to interrupt. Everyone laughed. Ellie smiled at the couple. "I'm very happy for both of you." Shania crossed the room and hugged her gently. "So are we." Stefan looked around the room. His mother smiled proudly. The twins laughed together. Ellie rested peacefully against her pillows. Shania stood beside him, her hand comfortably in his. Only weeks earlier, he believed happiness had one very specific shape. Life had shown him otherwise. Sometimes the most meaningful blessings arrived without warning. Sometimes they asked difficult questions before offering beautiful answers. And sometimes the family you were meant to have found you in the most unexpected way imaginable. For the first time since hearing that tiny voice in the botanical garden, Stefan no longer wondered what tomorrow might take from him. He found himself looking forward to what tomorrow might bring. 6 months passed more quickly than anyone expected. Life never returned to the way it had been before that afternoon in the botanical garden. Instead, it became something entirely new. Stefan adjusted his work schedule permanently. He still led his company, but no meeting remained on his calendar after 4 o'clock unless it truly couldn't wait. His employees noticed the change. Some assumed he had discovered a better work-life balance. Only a handful knew the real reason. Every weekday afternoon, a black SUV could be seen outside Maple Grove Elementary School. The moment the final bell rang, 2 little girls came running through the front doors. "Daddy!" Stefan barely had time to kneel before Kiki and Starlight threw their arms around him. No business success had ever compared to hearing that single word spoken with such joy. One afternoon, Kiki climbed into the front seat and proudly announced, "I got 100% on my spelling test." Stefan smiled. "I'm impressed." "You should be." She folded her arms with exaggerated confidence. It was a very difficult test. Starlight leaned forward from the back seat. "I didn't get a spelling test." "What did you get?" "A gold star." "For what?" She grinned. "My teacher said I helped another student when she felt sad." Stefan caught her eyes in the mirror. "I'm proud of both of you." Starlight smiled. "Mommy says helping people is a superpower." Stefan quietly thought to himself. She learned that from Ellie. Ellie's treatment demanded patience. There were good weeks, there were difficult ones. But little by little she became stronger. The first time her doctor approved a short afternoon outside the hospital, the twins insisted on planning the outing themselves. Their destination surprised no one. The botanical garden. When they arrived, Kiki looked around carefully before pointing toward the rose garden. "This is where we met Daddy." Starlight nodded. "And interrupted everything." Ellie smiled. "I've heard that story at least 20 times. You'll hear it again." "I don't doubt it." Stefan looked around the familiar paths. Only months earlier he had believed that place represented the moment his life fell apart. Now he understood something different. It had been the place where truth finally found him. Sometimes the moments people feared most became the moments they later treasured. Not because they were easy, because they changed everything that mattered. When Stefan and Shania finally chose a wedding date, they kept it simple. No television cameras, no celebrity guests, no extravagant decorations, only family, close friends, and the people who had stood beside them through every unexpected turn. The ceremony took place beneath a large oak tree in a quiet community garden. As guests took their seats, Fidel dabbed happily at her eyes. "I promised myself I wouldn't cry." The woman beside her smiled. "How's that working out?" "Terribly." Everyone laughed. At the front of the aisle, Stefan waited with a smile that never seemed to leave his face anymore. Then the music began. Shania appeared, radiant in a timeless ivory gown. Behind her came 2 very important attendants. Kiki carefully carried the rings. Starlight proudly scattered flower petals with complete enthusiasm, occasionally tossing a handful into the air instead of placing them neatly on the path. A few petals landed on Stefan's shoes. He laughed. "So much for practicing." Starlight shrugged. The flowers wanted to celebrate too. Even the officiant smiled. As Shania reached Stefan, she whispered, "Still nervous?" "More than the first time." She squeezed his hand. "I'll make this easy." The ceremony was filled with quiet smiles, heartfelt promises, and genuine laughter. When asked whether anyone wished to share a few words before the couple exchanged vows, Ellie slowly stood. The guests turned toward her. She smiled at Stefan, then at Shania. "I once believed life had closed a very important door." She looked toward her daughters. Instead, her voice softened. "It opened another one none of us expected." She looked at Shania. "Thank you." Shania shook her head. "You don't have to thank me. I do, for loving these girls as though your heart had been preparing for them all along." Shania's eyes filled with tears. She crossed the short distance between them and embraced Ellie. Not a single guest looked away. Some moments didn't require words. This was one of them. A year later, Stefan announced a new charitable foundation, not in his own name, not in his company's name. He called it the Open Door Foundation. Its mission was simple: to help families facing medical hardships stay connected during treatment. The foundation covered travel expenses, temporary housing, childcare support, and emergency assistance for parents who refused to leave their children's hospital rooms. During the opening ceremony, a reporter asked why the project mattered so much. Stefan smiled. Because no family should lose years together simply because life became complicated. He left it at that. Those who knew the full story understood exactly what he meant. Those who didn't simply applauded. Stefan had never needed strangers to know every chapter of his life. Helping people had always been enough. One Friday evening, Stefan arrived home after picking up the girls from school. The house felt unusually quiet. "Daddy?" Starlight whispered dramatically. "I think we're being sneaky. I noticed. Should we investigate?" "I believe we should." The sisters tiptoed through the hallway with exaggerated seriousness. When they reached the dining room, the lights suddenly came on. Surprise! Family and close friends filled the room. Ellie stood beside Fidel. Shania laughed as confetti drifted gently onto the table. Stefan looked completely confused. "Did I forget something?" Kiki grinned. "Yep." "What?" "Our family day." Stefan blinked. "Our what?" "The day we found each other," Starlight explained proudly. "We decided birthdays weren't enough, so now we celebrate this too." Stefan looked around the room. Every face held a smile. Every chair was filled. The table overflowed with homemade dishes prepared by people who genuinely cared for one another. He realized something. Family wasn't always created in the order people expected. Sometimes it arrived piece by piece, conversation by conversation, choice by choice. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the girls were asleep upstairs, Stefan stepped onto the back porch. Ellie joined him, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "You looked thoughtful all evening." "I was." He accepted the mug. "Thank you." She leaned against the porch railing. "What were you thinking about?" "The letter." She smiled. "I almost didn't write it." "I'm glad you did. So am I." Stefan looked toward the stars. "For years." He paused. "I thought life had taken something away from both of us." Ellie nodded. "It did. But it also gave us 2 extraordinary daughters." She laughed softly. "It certainly did." They stood quietly for a while, not because there was nothing left to say, because everything that truly mattered had already been spoken. Some relationships changed with time. Some became friendships built on gratitude instead of romance. Theirs had become exactly that. Several weeks later, Stefan took Kiki and Starlight back to the children's hospital where he had once volunteered as a college student. The activity room looked almost exactly as he remembered. Shelves filled with books, games stacked neatly in colorful bins, children waiting for treatments. One little boy looked nervous as Stefan walked in carrying a storybook. "Are you going to read to us?" Stefan smiled. "If you'll let me." The twin sat beside him. "You have to do the funny voices," Starlight whispered. Kiki nodded seriously. "It's the rules." Stefan laughed. "I suppose I don't have much choice." Soon the room echoed with children's laughter. Outside the doorway, Shania, Ellie, and Fidel watched quietly. None of them interrupted. Some moments deserved to unfold exactly as they were. As Stefan closed the final page, the little boy smiled. "That was the best story ever." Stefan glanced toward his daughters, then toward the people waiting just beyond the doorway. He smiled. "I've been lucky enough to live a pretty good one, too." The greatest achievement of his life had never appeared on the cover of a business magazine. It wasn't measured in money, awards, or headlines. It was found in the laughter of 2 little girls who had refused to stop searching. It was strengthened by the grace of a woman who chose compassion over resentment. It was honored by another woman who never allowed hardship to erase kindness from her heart. And it was guided by the lesson his mother had taught him long before success ever found him. Money can make life more comfortable, but kindness has a way of bringing people home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes second chances are worth fighting for. And before you go, tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you had been in Shania's place that day in the botanical garden? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, thank you for spending part of your day with Mr. Williams Storytime.